Willow, Season 6, Chapter 9, Delicacies and Delicate Things. I did not sleep, yet I'm more rested now than I have been in weeks. There's an energy coursing through my nerves that I have not felt in years. The last time I felt this way, I had spent the evening at a school dance. School dances, in fact, any kind of school event, were not exactly my cup of tea in those days. They always seemed catered to the more popular kids. It was their music that got played, and they were offered center stage. People like me were invited, but only so we could bloat the crowd. We were the celery sticks and baby carrots at their picnic. Whenever possible, I would avoid these things. Too conscious of the social dynamics at play, I had no desire to be part of their theater. There were always better things to do, anyway, even if that was watching movies at home or reading a book at the bar where my dad used to waste his evenings. But by the time high school was almost over, I had plunged headfirst into my dreams of cooking. So, when the time came for the welcome back to your nightmare dance after the Christmas holidays, I already saw myself as the next Alex Guarnaschelli. No one asked me to bake for the dance. It wasn't something that would have crossed the mind of the organizers anyways. They were putting together a party, hopefully one that would lead to after parties where they could share beers and have some real fun. Whatever catering was in the school budget was good enough for them. Lucky for them, the stars aligned perfectly. They had themed their dance around the concept of a Renaissance fair, and I had been training myself to make bread and cakes. I offered to supplement whatever sandwiches and soft drinks were on offer with fresh loaves and rich butter. Students showed up wearing a vast array of costumes, some fancy and elaborate, others little more than a borrowed laced shirt. A few of the loudest students arrived dressed as jesters and proceeded to make nuisances of themselves. Even the nerds got a moment to shine, donning their very best live-action role-playing vestments. My bread didn't steal the show. Bread is amazing, but it's usually a quiet hero. I attended, of course, if only so I could deliver my goods and see people's reaction. The vast majority didn't make much of the little extra added to their festivities, but the few who noticed would comment. Either they'd say something about the flavor of the warm loaf, or they would smile and nod in a way that made clear their appreciation. That's all I wanted to know at the time. Could I make something good enough, in large enough quantity, to pass as a professional? And I did. But that's not all I did that evening. Against my better judgment and opposite all expectations, I also had fun. I danced and chatted with people with whom I would normally never speak. Some were glad to see me, others just happy to have someone new and unexpected to talk to. Long after the last crumb of bread was consumed, I remained. Mostly I stood by the side, sipping juice and watching others have fun. When a particularly good song would play, I might venture into the shallow end of the dance floor. It wasn't my plan to do any more than that, but on a few occasions I would get swept away, losing myself in the crowd. There were no invitations to the after parties, not that I would have accepted anyways. It didn't register as rejection, though. Baking bread wasn't meant as a backstage pass to the realm of popularity. The high I felt from the overheard compliments and uncharacteristic abandon followed me home like a stalker, though. I tapped my foot at the bus stop and sang to myself walking to my front door. Once alone in my room, I danced some more. My ego had been fed, not only by the culinary success, but by the brief feeling of acceptance. For the length of that night, most of my fears and insecurities about life were lifted. I was professionally, socially, and personally comfortable, and that kept me fed until the rising of the sun and through the following day. I felt safe, and through that, I felt powerful. What the dance had done for 16-year-old Miriam, the nightmare of the crone in the mirror had done to me now. Leafing through the Dufour recipe grimoire to the page the crone mentioned, I found something I hadn't expected. Something that wasn't written by Doris, but something formidable nonetheless.
"You look in a dangerously good mood,"
Annabelle says, looking over her mug in a manner reminiscent of Olivia Figg. I do. The sun has yet to promise its arrival with a lightening of the skies or a tickle of orange over the clouds, yet we're here, preparing the Aquilo for the day. Annabelle is dragging her feet, stopping every few minutes to sit and drink coffee. Meanwhile, I'm a living storm. By the time Annabelle arrived, I had already started with baking for the day, and the Aquilo was filled with the rich aroma of butter and sugar. Coffee is ground and the floors are clean. Fresh napkins adorn the counter, not the boring straight pile as you see every day, but a spiraling tower. All the ingredients I need to create the various dishes Chef Gagnon selected for his show have been cut and measured. I even kept a few zucchini and onions untouched in case he needs shots of me chopping them up. I have a fresh batch of biscotti cooling on the counter, waiting to be adorned with a touch of tempered chocolate. And just to thumb my nose at Gagnon, I'm now piping royal icing into fancy laced patterns atop sugar cookies. I make sure to set one aside for Nisha. I plan on piping in the features of a bear with a big bow for her, if I have time. I had a nightmare, I explain, without explaining anything.
"Oh, well, now that you put it that way, all the pieces are falling together."
Her sarcasm makes me smile. I'm never annoyed by Annabelle's occasional cynicism, but this time I find it genuinely amusing. Triumphant, I pull my piping bag away from my latest creation and admire my handiwork. The perfectly circular sugar cookie, bland and boring to the eyes, now has a picture-perfect snow-white Aquilo tree painted in gorgeous sweet relief upon its surface. I bet Bertrand could take a few shots of this masterpiece for the video. If he does, I'll have to ask for stills to use in promotional material. I had a nightmare, I repeat while picking up the coffee pot, but it was followed by a dream. Her confused look as I warm her mug is enough to prompt for me to go on. Ophelia dropped by.
"Ah, there's the nightmare."
Right. She was full of righteous indignation, piss and vinegar. You know, because of the burglary. Annabelle's eyes go wide and her lips tighten at the mention of her plan. We didn't exactly part on amicable terms. I feel like that woman is declaring war on me every other day these past few weeks, but this time she seemed more serious than ever. I don't think she ever expected me to go so far as to invade her space. Indignation crawls up Annabelle's tired features, giving her a renewed zest of energy, just as the first beams of light creep over the rooftops of Aquilo.
"After what she did to Gulliver, I think we're justified in taking off the kid gloves, aren't we?"
My nod is meant as approval of her sentiment, but I remain wary of Annabelle's more headstrong nature. Last thing I need is for my friend to get into a bare-fisted brawl with the local witch bully. I love Annabelle dearly, but she reminds me of myself a few years ago, ready to take on Goliath with nothing but a sling and a complete disregard for the odds. For sure, but after my little adventure into her den, I'll be happy not reliving that for a while. I don't know where she learned to do that sort of thing, but if there's a lesson to be learned from those yarn golems, the scarves, and how much leverage she can manage to get over Gulliver, it's that she's far more powerful than I ever gave her credit. And more devious, too. Her cat prowls my back alley. She gave one of her crochet animals to little Nisha. It's not just the magic at her disposal, it's how she's using it. I don't have the malicious imagination to come up with that kind of stuff. I'm just a cook. Annabelle doesn't look convinced, but instead of voicing that opinion, she raises her mug in a mock toast, a thin and insincere smile on her lips.
"Well, I see why you're so cheery then."
That's not the point, I say, shaking my head with a grin. I also had a dream. Ever since moving to Aquilo, I've always felt that there was something sharing this space with me. Nothing too obvious, just a warm embrace when I needed it most, or a feeling of pride whenever I did something right.
You've seen ghosts and demons,
Annabelle cuts in.
You've danced under and have summoned magical lights. You own a fairy. You can say the place is haunted. It's fine.
Right. Well, last night, I saw her.
The ghost?
Kinda. I always assumed it was Doris who was watching over me. Makes sense. She was the one to leave the cafe to me, and she was the last one to operate the Aquilo. But the thing is, Doris never knew me. She didn't leave the Aquilo to me. Instead, it went to a long list of other relatives who turned it down until Helen Edna had no one else in the line of inheritance. I leaned down to grab something from underneath the counter. The old Dufour recipe grimoire sitting atop the red scarf left behind by Ophelia. It's heavy and makes a satisfying thump when it lands on the counter between Annabelle and I. But it isn't Doris I saw last night, and the witch that appeared to me is powerful and has a few tricks up her sleeve. Tricks she kept written here. I put my hand flat atop the cover of the book. Surrounded by my culinary achievements, ready for the day to feature my skills and talents, and with the means to finally show Ophelia that she's not the only one with real power in town, I feel confident. The book didn't hold all the answers, pre-cooked and pre-packaged for easy consumption. The recipe on page 73 is an ambitious one. There are ingredients on there that I can't fathom how they were acquired over a century ago in this part of the world. If nothing else, they would have been prohibitively expensive. Other ingredients would be more at home in a proper witch's cauldron than in a non-stick baking pan. If nothing else, they would raise a few eyebrows at the Food and Drug Administration or with Health Canada. Others would have been easy back then, but might require some legwork today. Regardless, if the effects scribbled in harsh letters in the margin are real, then it is a powerful spell, like nothing I've seen in the book so far. That's the other issue with this recipe. I'd long ago given up on deciphering the handwriting on dog-eared pages. Scratched in with maddening cursive in red and black ink upon tawny paper, the words might as well have been etched in cuneiform. Now I realize that the more effort each recipe demands, the more potent it appears to be. And this is a recipe of intense power. The thought of going back into the grimoire to finish reading and understand page 73 dominates my mind all through the day. My performance remains unaffected, however. When Gagnon arrives at the Aquilo, he's greeted by a wall of welcoming aromas and a unique warmth only an oven can produce. Immediately upon crossing the threshold, chimes welcoming him and his two assistants, his demeanor lightens. The curmudgeon remains at the door, leaving only the driven and consummate professional to filter through, like a sieve removing lumps from a coulis. "Ah!" he exclaims, arms spread wide, taking in deep breaths with every step. "Now this is the cafe I want featured on my show. Relieved you see to be taking this venture seriously at last, Miss Dufour." With a flourish, like a swordsman sheathing his weapon, I spin a tea-cloth once in front of me before slinging it over my shoulder. They say that the best revenge is to live well. While I appreciate the sentiment, and mostly subscribe to the serene approach to facing the slights of others, I think vengeance can also be served with a generous helping of success. Why only live well when I can outshine? "Excellent," I say, shoulders squared and back straight, as if I'd gotten a full 8 hours of sleep instead of the scant 45 minutes. "Let's get this show on the road then. I have a few important things to get done once we wrap." I don't wait for an answer, busying myself instead with serving coffee to the new arrivals. There's no escaping the souring of Gagnon's mood, however. "You have something better to do, Miriam?" 3 cups get filled with almost mathematical precision. There's no need to dig very deep to remember everyone's preferred way to have their coffee, and the whole operation is part of a calculated means of flexing in front of my old teacher. I may have disappointed him in the last 2 days, but this morning I'm putting my foot down. If he deems me unworthy of his show, it will not be by any fault of mine. You know how it is. I set a mug in front of the chef. When you're running a business, everything is the most important thing. There's no room to argue. Last I checked, Frederick Gagnon owns 3 restaurants. He now also has his little media empire, and I wouldn't be surprised if there were a few other ventures to which he lent his name. If nothing else, the man's work ethic and dedication is to be admired. Then again, I can't imagine him having a family that would want to spend much time in his company. It's a sad thought, but I'm loath to dwell on it. Nothing of his behavior indicates that he's unhappy with his lot. And who knows, maybe I'm wrong and the man is a teddy bear in the presence of loved ones. Bottom line is, I don't care right now. All I want is to finish the taping of his show with as much cathartic showing off as I can wedge into the production. If Frederick Gagnon can leave Aquilo with so much as a splinter of regret for how he treated me in cooking school, I'll have had my revenge. After coffee, I'm awarded another short break. Hands on my hips, I watch as Gagnon goes back to his table to work on his narration some more. Meanwhile, Stefan is helping Bertrand unpack all of their equipment once again. For the duration of this interaction, Annabelle has sat quietly, sipping on her own mug, carefully flipping through the pages of the Dufour recipe book. In fact, carefully might be too weak a word to describe her attitude towards the tome. She makes a noticeable effort to keep her drink far from the pages and only pinches the corner of each with the tip of her fingers, lifting each sheet of paper as if it could fall to dust at any moment. She'll carefully pick up one of the bookmarks, those with dried flowers pressed into them, to study with awe.
Well,
she says, closing the book like a museum curator handling a priceless artifact.
You are in a mood, aren't you? The Gagnon you described to me would have literally bled magma from his ears being talked to like that.
A smile more smug than I think I've ever indulged in splits my face. He would have, I assure you. I guess he's a different person now, and maybe I am too. Annabelle takes a long sip from her mug, looking sideways at the chef. For his part, Gagnon is bent over his notebook. His writing isn't rushed or forced, interrupted at times by looking around, seeing nothing in particular. We're invisible to him, and so is the cafe. It's words that he's trying to find, and while I'm not much of a writer myself, I know the feeling. His is the face I make after sipping from a stew or sampling a sauce, searching for what's missing and what's too much.
Oh, you think so?
Annabelle asks, cutting off my train of thought. What's that supposed to mean? I say, maybe a little too harshly.
I think you're enjoying this in exactly the way you always wanted to. And I'm not saying you don't have the right to. Hell, nothing quite like the feeling of seeing an ex get dumped by his new flame, right? It's fun to see the tables turned once in a while.
It's not like that, I explain. But it is, and I know it. Okay, fine, I then concede. Maybe a little. I can't help it. It tastes good, if that makes any sense. Annabelle dangles a now empty mug by the handle, returning my smile with almost as much mischief.
Tastes like karma,
she says with a wink. The good humor is short-lived, however. Just as fast as she fell into her role of conniving accomplice to me, wicked smile and devilish eyes, the portrait of impish delight fades from her. The mug slips from her finger, bouncing once off the recipe book and rolling harmlessly onto the wooden countertop. A few drops of coffee did spill on the cover, but Annabelle doesn't even notice. Instead, her blue eyes, unblinking and round, are riveted onto something in the dining room. I turn around to see what she sees. This is Aquilo. The cafe's dining room has been visited by not 1 or 2, but 3 demons. There are ghosts in town, and the coffee shop was even once the site of a macaron sprite invasion. There is no limit to the possibilities of what I might see that's got Annabelle at a loss for words like this. With everything else we've seen, I figure we're probably due for trolls or maybe a werewolf, though the sunlight may be an issue for either of these monsters. Instead, I met with the most mundane of scenes. It's exactly what I expect to see. Gagnon is sipping from his mug, absent-minded in the process, while his expensive pen rests upon a near-empty page. Stefan is closing a camera case before moving another out of the way to gain access to a satchel filled with wires. Meanwhile, Bertrand is shrugging off his coat, his brow a little damp as his reward for keeping it on this long. He hangs his coat on the back of a chair, tugging at his checkered shirt to put it back in place. Then he pulls at his scarf to scratch his beard. And it hits me. His scarf is a bright mustard yellow, knit in soft wool, and of a design that has become all too familiar in the last week or so. I can hear the first crack in my confidence. I spend the morning not only juggling my duties as owner and operator of the Aquilo Café, not only the demands of Gagnon for his show, but also the creeping paranoia like a spider crawling up the back of my neck. More than once, I miss my cues because my focus is on Bertrand's neck, studying his scarf for any hint of Ophelia's influence. Everything that he does, I wonder if it's of his own volition or if his strings are being pulled. When the camera lingers on me too long for my taste, I think he's spying. When he's out of sight, I suspect yarn animals are being planted in the cafe. Part of the issue is that, even in school, I barely knew Bertrand. Our little cohort of aspiring chefs had its cliques and friend groups, but neither Bert nor I participated in any of it. I certainly didn't have the free time. Between work as a barista and trying to keep my relationship together with duct tape and twine, every hour at school had to be spent studying or cooking. Rare were the occasions when I would join the others for drinks or clubbing. Bert had a different problem. The guy just never fit in. It was clear from the very beginning that he didn't have the fire burning inside. Sarika was studying to take over from her father, pushing the family restaurant to new heights while still preserving their signature hospitality that had made it a middling success. Naomi dreamed of cooking on a cruise ship so she could travel the world while still doing the thing she loves. Luke had his ambitions set on becoming the apprentice of a world-renowned cook, and Patricia was going to open a gourmet food truck or become a food blogger, depending on what day you asked. Bertrand's only hope was getting a diploma and figuring it out from there. The talk amongst the cohort was that he would become a perpetual student, never settling on a career and taking classes well into his 30s. We were wrong, it turns out. Bert did find his path, and then that path put him under Chef Gagnon's tutelage, which lands him in my cafe wearing one of Ophelia's scarves. And I have to wonder again if that's all coincidence still.
Is it so hard to believe he just needed a scarf?
Annabelle asks, speaking as the devil's advocate. Lunch break isn't very long under Gagnon's schedule. It has no declared end time, but it's made clear that once the last crumb of sandwich is consumed or the final bite of croissant is swallowed, work begins anew. Of course, that only means we eat slow and talk more. I don't know, I wonder aloud, poking at the slice of fresh-baked Belgian loaf with my finger. Could be, but that doesn't change that he's wearing it.
So does every other person who walks in here for coffee and a maple tart. What if she gave him the scarf just to mess with you and you're letting her? Have you thought of that?
Without even pretending to ask, Annabelle takes a butter knife and goes about cutting my sandwich in half. My side is barely touched, with only a few bites nibbled off. Meanwhile, she's already polished off the chicken wrap on her plate and one of the aforementioned maple tarts. And now she's starting on my sandwich. I'm paranoid, I answer. Of course I've thought of that. But what do you want me to do about it? She chews faster, swallowing prematurely and with difficulty before raising her hand in the air. Her fingers snap, loud enough to break through the ambient noise and get everyone's attention. Then, with her best bartender voice, she calls out,
"Hey, Bert, nice scarf."
With a single bite of chicken wrap still pinched between his fingers, Bertrand looks up. In any other context, the confusion in his face would have been priceless. Mouth agape and eyes round, he looks up at Annabelle.
"Thanks? Where'd you get it?"
Annabelle demands, leaning her chin on her hands. Poor Bertrand is immediately and completely flustered by the sudden attention. I don't even know if Annabelle realizes how flirtatious she's being with him, or if this is just her being her. Slinging drinks while teasing out all manner of confidences and confessions comes naturally to my friend. Of course, Bert doesn't know what to do with himself, and isn't that the whole point? His fingers are quick to find the scarf, tugging at it, feeling it suddenly too tight around his neck.
"This? I got it down the street. It's not my color, but the owner of the shop insisted I take it. If you want it, you can have it. I just needed something because I left mine at the motel."
He punctuates his offer with an awkward smile. During the whole exchange, I've been holding my remaining sandwich half, slowly crushing the egg whites and feta cheese from between the bread. Everything Bertrand says confirms my worst fears about his scarf and Ophelia's involvement.
"Isn't it a bit warm to be wearing a scarf?"
I ask, butting into the conversation. Of course, my interruption is as welcome as hot sauce on strawberry sorbet. I sound like some old woman trying to keep teenagers from hooking up.
I like it. Otherwise, I feel a draft all the time."
So much for shaming him into taking the damn thing off. Fortunately, Annabelle has her own means to that end.
"Oh,"
she says, disappointed.
"I thought your offer was more immediate."
She pouts and turns her attention back to the stolen half sandwich. A clever ploy on her part, if perhaps a little heartless. But circumstances demand decisive yet subtle action. Something I have to admit, Annabelle is navigating with grace. Looking at Bertrand hesitate for a second, hand flat on the table and about to get up, I know that my friend's manipulation is paying off. I'll chide her later for toying with the poor boy's heart like that. For now, I'm just happy that I'll take the damn thing off and we can go about our day without Ophelia's shadow cast upon our work. Every day Gagnon is filming at the Aquilot is a day that I'm not using the cafe at its full capacity. I can only turn customers away from the dining room so long before it hurts the business side of things. A sigh of relief is already waiting in my lungs when there's a subtle shift. No one else sees it. Annabelle is playing coy, while Stefan mans the register, and Gagnon is playing movie director, going over the shots from this morning. The remains of my sandwich, little more than squished bread, eggs, cheese, and spinach at this point, fall from my hand onto the counter. The unmistakable memory of Gulliver breaking his hand on my countertop echoes unbidden, triggered by the sight before me. The yarn making up Bertrand's scarf ripples, like the skin of a snake as it seeks to coil itself tighter. Gulliver is a mountain of a man. Even wounded, I would still fear him under the right circumstances. Bertrand, however, isn't as much of a bone to be chewed. Not that I could take him in a fight, but I'd stand a better chance of making my escape. Not to mention, I'm not alone with the guy. This situation is different from last time I witnessed this sort of magic. So why do I feel just as afraid? The effect doesn't last, thankfully. Whatever is driving Bertrand, it's only enough for him to settle back down into his chair, adjust the scarf, and finish his last bite of chicken wrap.
"I think I'll give it to you later,"
he says, in as neutral a tone as a machine.
"if you don't mind."
"Ah," Annabelle insists ruefully.
"And I was getting a little cold."
But she doesn't shiver or even attempt to warm herself up. Instead, she pouts and frowns, inadequate disguises for her mischief. On his side, Bertrand starts to sweat, and his pull on the scarf becomes more insistent. This isn't new. These are the symptoms Gulliver showed before he lost control. The knitting ripples and tightens, a change so subtle you wouldn't know to look for it.
Enough!
Gagnon slaps his laptop shut.
You can indulge in meaningless banter when you're not on the clock, Bertrand. As for you, Annabelle Lagacé,
Annabelle specifies.
Yes, of course. As for you, Ms. Lagacé, I would thank you not to bother my staff while they work.
Having delivered his threats, Gagnon stands, frowning with both annoyance and exhaustion. The more we work together, the more of the old Frederick Gagnon I see. His impatience with those around him, his condescension towards all he views as his inferiors, they bubble to the surface with the slightest irritation. Except for with me. I don't know if it's because I own the cafe where he's filming, or if my cooking and career turn has earned the chef's respect, but despite some aggravated comments dealing with the delays, he's shown more respect to me in the last 3 days than in 3 semesters of cooking school.
How are we on schedule?
I ask, wiping my hands with a tea towel and walking around the counter.
Behind,
Gagnon laments.
At this rate, we should be able to wrap everything up tomorrow, but with no time to spare.
He smiles at me. Not condescension, nor a sarcastic gesture, but the smile of one professional to another.
And again, that's restaurant life, isn't it?
Was that camaraderie? Did, seconds after putting down my contemporaries, Gagnon elevate me to his level with some industry commiseration?
Besides,
he continues, ignorant of my bewilderment,
I can't imagine the financial impact of having your dining room closed for yet another day, though I assure you it will all be worth it in the end.
Gagnon doesn't get to finish his sentence. A loud crash, not of tables, chairs, silverware, or dishes, but of metal and glass and delicate things, interrupts him. At this point, Chef Frederick Gagnon takes on a tone of flesh I'd never seen in him. Sure, he would grow increasingly dark shades of red, almost delving into hues of burgundy when angered, but at the sound of the crash, it's as if he were being drained of blood with a pump. His skin turns the color of uncooked pie crust, and the muscles of his face relinquish all tension, leaving his jaw to drop. We both turn to look at the origin of the sound, and the obvious becomes all too real. One of the cameras, the big, expensive-looking one, has toppled over, tripod and all. To make matters worse, the massive piece of priceless electronics fell over on the table where Gagnon had left his computer, smashing both pieces of equipment in the process. We're in the moment before the explosion, that split second after the switch is flipped but before the conflagration itself. Bertrand is the only person anywhere near the site of the accident, and he's about to receive the full force of Gagnon Unleashed, not only as punishment for the broken gear, but as retribution for the time that will inevitably be wasted because of it. It's during that frozen moment in time that I get that one good look at Bert. His beard does nothing to hide the look of stunned confusion stamped on his face. He knows what's coming and, like trapped prey, is looking for any way out of the predicament. But none of that bothers me. The only thing I can focus on is his scarf. Maybe it's an illusion, a trick of the light combined with my own paranoia, but for that split second before Gagnon starts yelling, I could swear I see Bert's scarf move again. Not just the waving and rippling of the knitting pattern, though. For a second, it looks like the scarf is slithering back around Bert's neck from where the tripod had been a moment ago. Aquilo is written by J.F. Dubow and narrated and produced by me, Amy Frost. If you enjoyed this podcast and would like to hear more, please rate and review us on Apple Podcasts or your preferred podcast platform. Want to support the show? Buy us a coffee. Go to ko-fi.com/aquilo to donate. Aquilo has a Patreon. Visit patreon.com/Aquilo for details. Follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram under the username Aquilo.